The first thing he noticed, long before the steel door slammed shut, was the silence, the kind that felt engineered to erase a man from the world. If stories like this fascinate you, hit subscribe, because this one only gets darker. On the far end of California's northern coast, Pelican Bay State Prison rises out of the fog like a warning. Inside its secure housing unit, the SHU, men spend years in concrete boxes, isolated from every face they once knew. Officially, the SHU is the state's answer to gang violence. Unofficially, it became something much more dangerous. The prison system believed that burying gang leaders in silence would break their power. Instead, silence sharpened it. The moment inmate Luis Salinas Ortega arrived in the SHU, the atmosphere shifted. He wasn't loud. He wasn't violent. He didn't need to be. Ortega was a known shot caller with ties that ran from San Quentin to the streets of LA, a man whose words traveled faster than any guard could keep up with. Even here, stripped of movement and sunlight, he carried the kind of authority that made other cells go quiet. On his second night, something happened that staff noted but didn't understand. A faint tapping echoed down the tier. Soft, rhythmic. Almost polite. Then another tap answered it. A chain reaction of subtle knocks passed from cell to cell, dozens of men who weren't supposed to interact sending out a message the officers couldn't decode. Ortega sat on his bunk, hands folded, as if conducting an orchestra only he could hear. The guards dismissed it as boredom. They shouldn't have. By the end of the week, minor disturbances erupted on yards hundreds of miles away, fights, coordinated refusals, men moving with a level of synchronized discipline the system had hoped isolation would kill. At first, no one could explain how orders were still circulating. No visits, no phones, no contact. Yet the timing was too precise to ignore. The warden demanded answers, but the SHU officers were stuck with the same questions. How do orders escape a place where voices don't? How does influence travel through a facility built to stop it? One night, Officer Ray Dillon paused outside Ortega's cell. The inmate was sitting cross-legged, staring at a legal envelope laid flat on the floor. Nothing unusual, except for the expression. Ortega wasn't reading it. He was studying it like a blueprint. Dillon leaned closer. "What's in the envelope?" Ortega looked up, calm as ice. "Instructions," he said. The officer confiscated the envelope on the spot. Inside was nothing but a blank page. But the damage was done. Whatever message that envelope carried had already moved far beyond the SHU. The next morning, a coded letter surfaced at another prison, written in handwriting the mailroom swore didn't match Ortega's, yet the cadence, the structure, the phrasing, it felt like him. Like a voice traveling through walls. Someone in Pelican Bay's isolation unit was still pulling strings, and the system had no idea how deep the network ran. And then, on a foggy Tuesday, a guard noticed something on the exterior wall outside the SHU window, something that shouldn't have been there at all. A mark. A symbol. A message. Placed by someone who was never supposed to get that close. The investigation team was called in. What they found next would tear open everything the prison thought it understood about isolation. The symbol on the exterior wall wasn't graffiti. It wasn't random. It was a message, clean, deliberate, and unmistakably tied to one of California's most feared prison gangs. How it got there was the problem. No inmate in the SHU had touched open air in months. Yet someone had delivered a signal on behalf of a man locked inside a concrete box. The investigation team began tearing through Ortega's cell. They dismantled vents, cracked open light fixtures, and stripped his mattress. Nothing. Not a scrap of contraband. Not a single clue. But every officer who stepped inside reported the same sensation, as if every inch of the room had been used in ways they couldn't see. Pressure inside the unit began to rise. Yard officers at other prisons were reporting coordinated behavior again, inmates refusing meals in timed patterns, groups standing perfectly still during count, sudden shifts in alliances that made no strategic sense unless someone higher up was giving orders. The SHU wasn't crushing gang leadership. It was centralizing it. Meanwhile, Ortega remained unreadable. He sat in a cell with the stillness of a man who didn't need movement to feel powerful. His eyes followed the officers, but his expression never changed. He didn't smile. He didn't taunt. Silence was his language, and he spoke it fluently. The investigators turned their attention to the taps, those subtle knocks that first traveled down the tier. They interviewed other inmates, but no one admitted hearing anything unusual. Then one officer noticed a pattern: the taps always stopped the moment staff approached. As if someone had scouts listening, ready to cut off the relay at the slightest sign of danger. Communication wasn't broken inside the SHU. It was refined. A breakthrough came when a rookie CO overheard a faint clicking during morning rounds. Not the taps, this was sharper, faster, almost like Morse code. He pressed his ear against the cell door. The clicking stopped. When he moved on, it resumed. Someone was signaling from inside a vent, so fast and precise he couldn't follow the rhythm. The team pulled files, trying to understand who Ortega could possibly communicate with. That's when they noticed something they'd overlooked: every legal mail envelope he received had tiny, almost invisible indentations, pressure marks. Not ink. Not writing. Impressions, like someone had pressed a pen against a separate sheet to leave a pattern behind. Each envelope was a map. A system. Instructions coded in nothing but pressure. But even that didn't explain the symbol outside. Then came the moment that shifted everything. A confidential informant at a different prison revealed that Ortega's messages weren't traveling outward, they were circulating in loops. Multiple prisons, multiple yards, passing information in coded fragments, each piece harmless on its own. But once all the fragments reunited through the inmate network, they reassembled into orders. Pelican Bay wasn't the end of his communication chain. It was the hub. The investigators returned to Ortega's unit, hoping to confront him before the situation escalated further. But that morning, something was different. Officers noticed tension radiating from the tier. Men who normally stared at nothing now watched the guards with unnerving intensity. The clicking stopped. The tapping stopped. The entire tier fell into an unnatural silence. When the lead investigator approached Ortega's cell, he saw something that froze him mid-step. A folded slip of paper, clean, white, untouched, sat perfectly centered on the floor just inside the door. It hadn't been there during last night's search. No one had opened the slot. No mail had been delivered. But the paper was there. And Ortega, seated on the bunk, stared at it with a look that finally broke his calm. Not anger. Not fear. Expectation. What the investigators found inside that folded note would change the entire case, the entire prison, and the assumptions Pelican Bay had built its walls on. It wasn't a threat. It was a countdown. The countdown wasn't written in numbers. It was a sequence, 7 short lines of coded pressure marks, spaced unevenly across the page. To anyone else, it looked meaningless. But to the investigators who had spent months tracking Ortega's influence, it read like a silent fuse burning towards something no one could see. 7 days. That was the conclusion they reached. 7 days until, what? The administration scrambled. Units across California were quietly placed on alert. Yard movements were limited, mailrooms were doubled in staff, and every legal envelope entering Pelican Bay was screened with forensic microscopes. But none of it slowed the momentum. The network was already alive, humming with energy the prison couldn't intercept. Inside the SHU, the atmosphere grew heavier. Inmates walked differently, slower, more deliberate, as if waiting for something they couldn't admit they were part of. The tapping didn't return. Neither did the clicking. Silence had become the new message. On the 3rd day, a veteran officer named Castaneda noticed a strange pattern on the tier cameras. Inmates were standing in their cells at the same exact angle, back straight, heads turned toward the outer wall. All at once. No talking. No movement. Just a wall of silent bodies facing north, as if observing something beyond the concrete. On the fourth day, yard officers 2 prisons away reported an identical scene. Something was aligning. The investigators went back to Ortega, hoping he'd slip or flinch or show even a hint of the pressure he was building. But he remained still, leaning against the cold wall with his hands resting calmly in his lap. When asked about the countdown, he just said, "Isolation doesn't stop leadership. It concentrates it." By day 5, tension had reached a breaking point. Officers were exhausted. Administrators were frantic. No one knew whether they were facing a statewide hunger strike, coordinated violence, or something entirely new. Surveillance teams scanned for signs, but the strategy was too subtle, too disciplined. Whatever was coming was designed to stay invisible until it was already happening. The final blow landed on day 7, but not in the way everyone expected. Across multiple prisons, dozens of high-ranking gang affiliates submitted identical written requests, not demands, not threats. Requests. Each one asking for the same thing: to be moved out of the SHU and into step-down programs. To de-escalate. To negotiate. To talk. It stunned the administration. It stunned the officers. For years, violence had been the only language the system expected. But this network of silent communication, built through vents, taps, coded letters, and pressure marks, had coordinated the one move Pelican Bay never saw coming: collective negotiation. And Ortega had orchestrated it from inside a concrete box. Investigators realized the truth with a mix of disbelief and dread: the countdown wasn't leading to violence. It was leading to unity. For the first time, rival groups were aligning their demands instead of fighting each other. Not to overthrow the system, but to force the system to acknowledge them. Control wasn't slipping. It had shifted. What followed were months of reviews, policy reconsiderations, and tense conversations behind locked doors. Some officials saw progress. Others saw manipulation. But everyone understood one thing: Pelican Bay had become the heart of a new kind of influence, quiet, organized, and far more powerful than open conflict. And Ortega? He didn't celebrate. He didn't boast. He simply folded his hands, closed his eyes, and welcomed the silence he had mastered. In a world built to crush communication, he turned communication into a weapon. If you think this story was intense, the next one will leave you speechless. Subscribe for more true crime stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.